I never thought I would have to flash my FBI badge at a member of my own homeowners association. But when I saw Susan Whitmore trying to physically force my 16-year-old daughter into her silver Mercedes SUV, instinct took over before rational thought could catch up. The morning had started like any other Tuesday in our quiet subdivision of Willow Creek Estates, located in the suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina. I had taken the day off work to catch up on some paperwork at home, enjoying the rare luxury of working from my home office instead of driving into the FBI field office downtown. My daughter Emma had a half-day at school due to teacher planning, and she was supposed to walk home around noon. The neighborhood seemed peaceful, with perfectly manicured lawns and houses that all adhered to the strict aesthetic guidelines our HOA enforced with almost religious fervor. Susan Whitmore had been the president of our HOA for the past 3 years, and in that time, she had transformed from a somewhat overbearing neighbor into an absolute tyrant. She was 52 years old, with short blonde hair that she kept in a T Chinese letter I see a L. I want to speak to the manager style. And she drove that Mercedes like it was a tank designed to enforce her will upon the neighborhood. I had dealt with her numerous times over minor violations, everything from my trash cans being visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup, to a small oil stain on my driveway that I was given 72 hours to remove or face a $200 fine. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I witnessed when I looked out my front window at approximately 12:15 that afternoon. I had been reviewing case files on my laptop when I heard raised voices outside. Living in a quiet suburban neighborhood, any disturbance tends to catch your attention immediately. I stood up from my desk and walked to the front window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see what was happening. What I saw made my blood run cold and my training kick into high gear. Emma was standing on the sidewalk about 3 houses down from ours, her backpack slung over one shoulder, and Susan Whitmore had her hand wrapped around my daughter's upper arm. Susan's face was red, and even from this distance I could see she was yelling. Emma was trying to pull away, her face showing clear distress and fear. Then, as I watched in disbelief, Susan began physically attempting to push Emma toward the open passenger door of her Mercedes, which was parked at the curb with the engine running. I did not think. I did not grab my phone. I did not call for backup. I simply ran out of my house at a full sprint, my badge already in my hand by the time I cleared my front door. The distance between my house and where they stood felt like miles, though it could not have been more than 100 yards. I heard Emma shouting, "Let me go. I do not know what you are talking about." "You absolutely do know, young lady," Susan was screaming back at her. "I saw you walking through my yard, and you are going to come with me right now to pay for the damage you caused to my tulip beds. Your father thinks he can just ignore HOA regulations, but I will teach both of you a lesson about respecting community property." "I did not go near your yard," Emma cried out, still trying to pull free. "Please let me go. I want my dad." That was when Susan made her biggest mistake. She grabbed Emma with both hands and physically began to shove her toward the car, attempting to force her into the vehicle. Emma stumbled, nearly falling, her backpack dropping to the ground. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," I shouted as I closed the distance, my badge held high above my head. "Remove your hands from my daughter immediately." Susan's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide with surprise but not, I noticed, with any sense of remorse or fear that a normal person might exhibit when caught assaulting a minor. Instead, her face contorted into an expression of indignant rage. "Your daughter vandalized my property," she shrieked at me, incredibly not releasing Emma. "As HOA president, I have every right to detain her until we can assess the damages and arrange payment." I reached them and stepped between Susan and Emma, physically breaking her grip on my daughter's arm. Emma immediately moved behind me, and I could feel her shaking. The protective rage that filled me was unlike anything I had experienced in my 15 years with the Bureau. I had faced down armed suspects, conducted high-risk raids, and negotiated with dangerous criminals, but nothing had ever made me as angry as seeing this woman's hands on my child. "You have exactly zero rights to detain anyone," I said, my voice low and controlled in that way that my colleagues knew meant I was at my most dangerous. "You just committed assault and attempted kidnapping of a minor. I suggest you put your hands where I can see them and remain exactly where you are." Susan actually laughed. She threw back her head and laughed like I had told her a hilarious joke. "You cannot be serious. I am the HOA president. I have authority over this neighborhood, including disciplining residents and their children when they break community rules. It is all in the bylaws that you signed when you purchased your home." "No bylaw gives you the right to put your hands on a child," I said. Behind me, I could sense Emma was crying now, her breath coming in short gasps. "Emma, go into the house. Lock the door. Call 911 and ask for police and your mother." My wife Rachel was a prosecutor for the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office, and I knew she would want to be here for this. She had dealt with Susan's harassment almost as much as I had, and she had warned me multiple times that Susan's behavior was escalating into dangerous territory. I should have listened more carefully. Emma did not need to be told twice. I heard her footsteps running toward our house, and I kept my eyes fixed on Susan, who was now looking at me with an expression that could only be described as smugly defiant. "You are overreacting," Susan said, brushing off her blouse as if our confrontation had merely wrinkled her clothing. "All I was doing was bringing the girl to see the damage she caused. Her footprints were all through my tulip bed this morning, and those bulbs cost $40 each. I imported them from Holland specifically for the spring garden tour that the HOA is hosting next month. My daughter left for school at 7:15 this morning on the bus," I said, pulling out my phone with one hand while keeping my other hand near my service weapon, which was holstered at my hip under my shirt. "I always carried, even on days off. She has been at school all day until just now. She could not possibly have walked through your garden." "I know what I saw," Susan insisted. "Teenager, dark hair about her height. It was definitely her. And even if it was not, you have been in violation of at least 15 HOA regulations in the past month alone. Someone needs to teach you people that rules apply to everyone." The way she said, "you people," made my jaw clench. I had dealt with enough bigotry in my career to recognize it in all its forms. My wife was black, and Emma had her mother's beautiful dark skin and hair. I had suspected for some time that Susan's particular obsession with our family went beyond normal HOA overreach into something more sinister, but I had never been able to prove it. Until now. "You people," I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "Please clarify what you mean by that, Mrs. Whitmore." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. She must have realized she had revealed more than she intended. "I simply meant people who do not respect HOA rules," she said quickly, but her eyes shifted away from mine, and I knew she was lying. The sound of sirens in the distance made us both turn our heads. Emma must have reached the house and made the call. I felt a small measure of relief that she was safe inside, though I knew this incident would probably traumatize her for quite some time. The idea that a trusted adult in our neighborhood, someone who was supposed to look out for the community's well-being, had physically assaulted her and tried to force her into a vehicle would take time to process and overcome. 2 Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department patrol cars pulled up within minutes, lights flashing. 4 officers emerged, and I recognized one of them, Officer Janet Rodriguez, who I had worked with on a joint task force about a year ago. "Agent Morrison," she said, her hand resting on her duty belt as she quickly assessed the situation. "We got a call about an attempted kidnapping." "Officer Rodriguez," I acknowledged. "This is Susan Whitmore, president of our HOA. I witnessed her physically restraining my 16-year-old daughter and attempting to force her into that vehicle." I pointed at the Mercedes, which was still running at the curb. When I intervened and identified myself, she claimed she had authority as HOA president to detain my daughter over alleged property damage. The other 3 officers had spread out, one moving to check on the Mercedes, another taking a position where he could observe Susan clearly, and the third walking toward my house, probably to check on Emma. Susan's confident demeanor was finally beginning to crack. "This is ridiculous," she said, but her voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. "I was simply trying to resolve a community issue. This man is blowing everything completely out of proportion because he does not like being held accountable for his violations." "Ma'am, did you physically restrain a minor?" Officer Rodriguez asked, her voice professional and neutral. "I barely touched her," Susan protested. "I just guided her toward my car so we could go look at the damage together." "My daughter was yelling for you to let her go," I interjected. "She was clearly in distress. She did not consent to go anywhere with you, and as a minor, she could not legally consent anyway. You grabbed her, you attempted to force her into your vehicle, and you refused to release her even when she explicitly told you to let her go." Officer Rodriguez looked at Susan with an expression I had seen many times on law enforcement officers' faces, when they realized they were dealing with someone who genuinely did not understand the severity of what they had done. "Ma'am, I need you to place your hands behind your back." "What? No." Susan stepped backward, her face going pale and then flushing red again. "You cannot arrest me. I am the HOA president. I was performing my duties. Check the bylaws. I have copies in my car. I have authority over this neighborhood." "No bylaw grants you authority to physically restrain minors or attempt to transport them without parental consent," Officer Rodriguez said, her voice hardening. "That is called kidnapping, and it is a felony. Now place your hands behind your back, or I will add resisting arrest to your charges." Another car pulled up, this one a dark blue sedan that I recognized immediately as my wife's vehicle. Rachel emerged at her run, her professional attire slightly disheveled from what must have been a frantic drive from downtown. She took in the scene with the quick assessment of someone who had spent 12 years prosecuting criminals. "Emma," she asked immediately, looking at me. "Inside safe," I assured her. "Shaken up, but physically fine." Rachel's expression shifted from worried mother to furious prosecutor in an instant. She turned to look at Susan, who was now in handcuffs, still protesting loudly about her rights and the HOA bylaws and how we would all be sorry when her lawyer got involved. "Susan Whitmore," Rachel said, her voice cutting through Susan's tirade like a knife. "I am Rachel Morrison, Assistant District Attorney for Mecklenburg County. I want you to understand very clearly that attempting to kidnap a minor, especially the child of 2 law enforcement officials, is something my office takes extremely seriously. I suggest you stop talking immediately and request an attorney." Susan's mouth snapped shut, and for the first time, genuine fear showed in her eyes. The reality of her situation was apparently beginning to penetrate her entitled bubble. Officer Rodriguez guided Susan toward one of the patrol cars while another officer retrieved Susan's purse and keys from the Mercedes, cataloging them as evidence. Rachel walked over to me and I could see her hands were shaking slightly. "Is she really okay?" Rachel asked quietly. "She was terrified," I admitted. Susan had her by the arm and was physically pushing her toward the car. Emma was fighting back, trying to get away. If I had come out 30 seconds later, I did not finish the sentence. We both knew what might have happened. Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, and I could see her processing her emotions, compartmentalizing them the way we both had learned to do in our respective careers. When she opened her eyes again, she was back in prosecutor mode. I need to recuse myself from this case due to conflict of interest, but I know exactly who I am handing it to, she said. Mark Davidson has been wanting to crack down on vigilante justice cases. This will be right up his alley. The officer who had gone to check on Emma emerged from our house. The minor appears shaken but unharmed, he reported. She gave a preliminary statement, says the suspect grabbed her arm hard enough to leave marks and tried to push her into the vehicle. She states she never went near the suspect's property and has no idea what the suspect was talking about regarding damaged flowers. "Did you photograph the marks on her arm?" I asked immediately. "Yes, sir. Clear bruising consistent with being forcibly grabbed. They will develop more over the next few hours." I felt my anger surge again, but Rachel put a hand on my arm. "Let the system work," she said quietly. "We do this by the book, everything documented, everything proper. No defense attorney is going to be able to claim we overreached or violated her rights." She was right, of course, but the father in me wanted to do more than just let the system work. The father in me wanted to ensure that Susan Whitmore never came within 100 yards of my daughter again. As the officers finished their initial investigation, neighbors began emerging from their houses, drawn by the police presence and the sight of their HOA president in handcuffs in the back of a patrol car. I saw Jim and Margaret Chen from across the street, both of them looking shocked. Next to them stood Robert Williams and his husband Thomas, who lived 2 doors down. The Johnsons, the Patel family, the Rodriguezes no relation to Officer Rodriguez, and at least a dozen other households had representatives standing on their lawns, watching the scene unfold. Susan, visible through the patrol car window, was talking animatedly to Officer Rodriguez, who was taking notes with an expression of patient professional tolerance. I could only imagine what Susan was saying, probably still insisting that she had done nothing wrong and that we were all conspiring against her because we did not respect her authority. Margaret Chen walked over to us cautiously. She was a small woman in her 60s, originally from Taiwan, and one of the kindest people in the neighborhood. She was also, I knew, terrified of Susan Whitmore. "Is Emma all right?" she asked, her accent soft and her face creased with concern. "She will be," Rachel assured her. "Thank you for asking, Margaret." "That woman," Margaret said, shaking her head and dropping her voice to barely above a whisper, even though Susan was locked in a police car 20 feet away. "She has been getting worse and worse. Last week, she threatened to fine us $300 because our grandson's bicycle was on our front lawn for 2 hours. She said it was an eyesore and violated community aesthetics standards." A child's bicycle. Robert Williams had also approached, and he nodded in agreement. "She has been on a rampage lately. I think the little bit of power she has gone to her head. But this." He gestured toward the police cars. "Trying to force Emma into her car, that is insane, that is criminal." "It absolutely is criminal," Rachel confirmed, "and it will be prosecuted as such." Officer Rodriguez finished her preliminary work and approached us. "Agent Morrison, Mrs. Morrison, we are going to transport the suspect to the station for booking. You will need to bring Emma down to give a formal statement, and we will need to photograph her injuries again in a few hours when the bruising is more developed. We will also need your statement as a witness, Agent Morrison." "Of course," I said. "Whatever you need." "One more thing," Officer Rodriguez said, glancing back at the patrol car. "She keeps insisting that she has video evidence from her home security cameras that proves Emma vandalized her property this morning. We are going to need to review that footage." "Emma was at school," I said firmly. "I can provide her attendance records, bus records, and witness statements from her teachers and classmates. There is no way she was anywhere near Susan's property this morning." "I believe you," Officer Rodriguez said, but we need to follow every lead. If there is someone on that video, and it is not Emma, then we need to know who it actually was. And if there is no one on that video at all, then we have evidence that the suspect manufactured a false accusation to justify assaulting your daughter. That was a good point. I had been so focused on the assault itself that I had not fully considered the pretext Susan had used. If she had made up the entire story about Emma damaging her garden, that showed premeditation. This was not a heat-of-the-moment mistake, but a calculated attack on my daughter. The patrol cars departed with Susan in custody, and gradually the neighbors dispersed back to their homes, though I could see curtains twitching in windows up and down the street. This would be the talk of Willow Creek Estates for months to come. Rachel and I went inside to check on Emma. We found her in the living room, curled up on the couch with her knees drawn to her chest, looking smaller than her 16 years. Her eyes were red from crying, and there were indeed visible marks on her upper arm where Susan had grabbed her, the outline of fingers already starting to purple against her brown skin. "Hey, sweetheart," Rachel said softly, sitting down next to Emma and pulling her into a hug. "You are safe now." "Why did she do that?" Emma asked, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. "I did not do anything. I was just walking home from the bus stop." She pulled up next to me and started yelling about me ruining her flowers, and when I said I did not know what she was talking about, she got out of her car and grabbed me. I tried to get away, but she was so strong and she kept saying I had to come with her, and I was so scared. "I know," I said, moving to sit on Emma's other side. "I know you were scared. But you did exactly the right thing. You told her no, you tried to get away, and you called for help as soon as you could. You did everything right. Is she going to come back?" Emma asked, looking up at me with frightened eyes. "No," I said firmly. "She is in jail right now, and she is going to be charged with very serious crimes. She will not be allowed to come near you." "We are going to make sure of it," Rachel added. "We are going to get a restraining order, and she will not be allowed within 500 feet of you, our home, or your school. If she violates that order, she goes right back to jail." We spent the next hour just sitting with Emma, letting her talk through what had happened, reassuring her that she was safe and that none of this was her fault. Eventually, she calmed down enough to eat some lunch, though I noticed her hands were still shaking slightly as she held her sandwich. Around 3 in the afternoon, Officer Rodriguez called to let us know that they had reviewed Susan's security footage. Just as I had suspected, there was no one visible in her garden at any time that morning. The tulip bed she claimed had been vandalized showed no signs of damage at all. Susan had fabricated the entire story. "This changes the charges significantly," Officer Rodriguez told me. "This was not a misunderstanding or a citizen's arrest gone wrong. This was a premeditated false accusation followed by attempted kidnapping. The DA's office is considering additional charges of filing a false police report and making false statements." "Good," I said. "She needs to face consequences for what she did." The next few days were a whirlwind of statements, photographs, meetings with prosecutors, and consultations with attorneys. Rachel's colleague, Mark Davidson, took over the case as lead prosecutor, and he was as thorough and aggressive as Rachel had promised. He immediately filed for the restraining order, which was granted within 24 hours. Susan was released on a $50,000 bond with strict conditions, including staying away from our family and surrendering her passport. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Susan from her position as president, effective immediately. They also issued a formal apology to our family and announced that they would be reviewing all of Susan's actions over the past 3 years to ensure no other families had been subjected to harassment or abuse of power. It turned out that we were far from the only ones. Once the story broke and people felt safe to come forward, at least 20 families reported incidents of Susan overstepping her authority, making discriminatory comments, or threatening them with fines and legal action over minor or imaginary violations. The Chens, the Williamses, the Patel family, and several others provided written statements detailing behavior that ranged from simple harassment to what appeared to be racially motivated targeting. 3 families specifically reported that Susan had made comments about how certain people did not belong in a neighborhood like Willow Creek Estates. 2 families said she had tried to prevent them from using the community pool, claiming they had not paid their dues when records showed they were fully paid up. 1 family reported that Susan had filed a complaint with the county claiming their home-based business was illegal, even though they had all proper permits and licenses. The pattern was clear and damning. Susan had been using her position as HOA president as a platform for harassment and discrimination, and she had finally escalated to violence when she targeted Emma. The preliminary hearing was held 3 weeks after the incident. Mark Davidson laid out the prosecution's case methodically and thoroughly. He presented the security footage from Susan's own cameras showing no one in her garden. He presented attendance records from Emma's school showing she was in class all morning. He presented photographs of the bruises on Emma's arm. He presented my testimony as a federal law enforcement officer and eyewitness to the attempted kidnapping. He presented Officer Rodriguez's testimony about Susan's statements and behavior. He even presented statements from neighbors about Susan's pattern of harassment and discriminatory behavior to establish motive and state of mind. Susan's attorney, a nervous-looking man named Gerald Pritchard, tried to argue that Susan had made an honest mistake and that her intentions were merely to resolve a community issue. He tried to characterize the physical contact as minimal, and the attempt to get Emma into the car as nothing more than an invitation that Emma misunderstood. Judge Patricia Hernandez was having none of it. She watched the security footage, examined the photographs of Emma's bruises, and read through the witness statements with an expression that grew progressively more severe. "Mr. Pritchard," she said when the defense attorney finished his arguments, "are you seriously asking this court to believe that your client accidentally grabbed this child hard enough to leave bruises, accidentally attempted to force her into a vehicle, and accidentally made up a completely false story about property damage to justify these actions?" "Your Honor, my client maintains that she believed she was acting within her authority as HOA president," Pritchard said weakly. "No HOA bylaw grants authority to assault and kidnap children, Mr. Pritchard," Judge Hernandez said sharply, "I am binding this case over for trial on all charges. The defendant will remain on bond with all current conditions in place, and I am adding an additional condition that the defendant have no contact whatsoever with any member of the Willow Creek Estates HOA board or any residents of that community, except through her attorney." Susan, sitting at the defense table, looked like she had aged 10 years in 3 weeks. Her trademark haircut was less styled, and she wore a conservative gray suit instead of her usual designer outfits. For the first time since this had begun, I saw something other than defiance or indignation in her expression. I saw fear and the dawning realization that her actions had consequences she had never imagined. The case made local news, and then regional news, and eventually was picked up by a few national outlets as an example of HOA overreach taken to criminal extremes. Our neighborhood became something of a spectacle, with news vans occasionally parked on our street and reporters trying to interview neighbors about life under Susan's HOA reign of terror. Most people declined to comment publicly, still uncomfortable with the attention, but a few spoke up. Robert Williams gave an interview to a local news station about how Susan had harassed him and his husband with constant minor violation notices that she never issued to other residents. The Patel family shared their story about Susan's attempts to prevent them from painting their front door a shade of blue that she claimed violated community standards, even though 3 other houses had doors in similar shades. The trial was scheduled for 4 months after the initial incident, which gave everyone time to prepare and also, hopefully, gave Emma time to heal emotionally from the trauma. She was seeing a therapist twice a week, and while she was still nervous about walking alone in the neighborhood, she was gradually regaining her confidence. Rachel or I walked with her to and from the bus stop every day now, which we probably should have been doing anyway, but had not felt was necessary in our supposedly safe suburban neighborhood. The community itself seemed to be going through a reckoning. The new HOA president, Jim Chen, instituted significant reforms to prevent future abuses of power. He limited the authority of the president, requiring board votes on any fines or enforcement actions. He implemented a formal appeals process for residents who felt they were being unfairly targeted. He established term limits and recall procedures. Most importantly, he made it clear that the HOA's purpose was to maintain property values and community standards, not to harass residents or enforce the personal preferences of board members. During this time, I dug deeper into Susan's background, partially out of professional curiosity and partially out of a need to understand how someone could justify trying to kidnap my daughter. What I found was a pattern of escalating entitlement and control issues that stretched back years. Susan had been divorced twice, both times with her ex-husband citing her controlling behavior and inability to compromise as primary factors. She had been fired from 2 previous jobs, one in property management and one in real estate, both times following complaints about her treatment of clients and coworkers. She had been HOA president in her previous neighborhood before moving to Willow Creek Estates, and I managed to track down several former residents who told me she had been just as bad there, though she had never escalated to physical violence. One former neighbor told me that Susan seemed to view HOA rules as almost sacred laws and herself as the high priestess charged with enforcing them. Another said that Susan appeared to genuinely believe that her position gave her authority similar to that of law enforcement, which explained why she had been so shocked when actual law enforcement arrested her for breaking actual laws. The psychological profile that emerged was of someone with a deep need for control and validation, combined with an inflated sense of her own importance and authority. In a different context, with proper support and treatment, Susan might have channeled these tendencies into something productive. But given unchecked power in an HOA where most residents were too busy or too intimidated to challenge her, she had spiraled into increasingly egregious behavior until she finally crossed the line into criminal conduct. As the trial date approached, Susan's attorney reached out to Mark Davidson about a possible plea deal. They were offering a guilty plea to reduced charges in exchange for a recommendation of probation and community service instead of jail time. Mark brought the offer to us before responding. Rachel and I discussed it at length, and we also talked to Emma about it, since she was the primary victim. Emma surprised me with her maturity in thinking through the options. "I do not want to have to testify," she admitted. "The idea of sitting in a courtroom with her there, talking about what happened, it makes me feel sick. But I also do not want her to think she can just get away with it. What if she does this to someone else?" The plea deal would include mandatory counseling and a permanent restraining order, I explained. She would have a felony conviction on her record, which would affect her ability to get jobs, serve on HOA boards, or have any position of authority. And if she ever violated the restraining order or committed any other crime, she would go to jail immediately. But no jail time now, Emma asked. Probably not, Rachel confirmed. Maybe some county jail time, a few months at most, but not state prison. Emma thought about it for a long time. What do you think I should do? She finally asked. I think that is entirely up to you, I said. If you want to go to trial, we will be right there with you every step of the way. If you want to accept the plea deal and put this behind you, we will support that too. There is no wrong answer. I want it to be over, Emma said quietly. I want to stop thinking about it every day. If she pleads guilty and has to get counseling and stay away from us forever, that is enough for me. I just want to move on. We conveyed Emma's decision to Mark Davidson, who negotiated the final terms of the plea deal. Susan would plead guilty to attempted kidnapping of a minor and assault, both felonies. She would be sentenced to 5 years of supervised probation, with the first 6 months served in county jail. She would be required to attend mandatory counseling for a minimum of 2 years. She would have a permanent restraining order prohibiting her from coming within 500 feet of Emma, our home, or Emma's school. She would be prohibited from serving on any HOA board or holding any similar position of community authority. And she would be required to issue a written apology to Emma and our family, as well as a general apology to the Willow Creek Estates community. The plea hearing was held on a Wednesday morning in late August, 5 months after the incident. The courtroom was packed with residents from our neighborhood, many of whom had come to see justice served and to support our family. Susan stood before Judge Hernandez and admitted in a quiet voice that she had falsely accused Emma of property damage, physically assaulted her, and attempted to force her into a vehicle against her will. Do you understand that you are pleading guilty to felony charges? Judge Hernandez asked. Yes, Your Honor, Susan said. And do you understand the consequences of these convictions, including the impact on your civil rights and future opportunities? Yes, Your Honor. Do you have anything you would like to say before I accept this plea and impose sentencing? Susan turned to look at where Emma sat between Rachel and me. For a moment our eyes met and I tried to read her expression. Remorse, resentment, fear, it was hard to tell. I am sorry, Susan said, and her voice cracked slightly. I was wrong. I let my position go to my head, and I convinced myself that I was protecting the community when really I was just trying to control everyone around me. I scared your daughter and I hurt her, and there is no excuse for that. I am truly sorry for what I did. It sounded sincere, though I had seen enough criminals apologize in court to know that sincerity was sometimes hard to judge. What mattered was that she had admitted her guilt and would face consequences. Judge Hernandez accepted the plea and imposed the agreed-upon sentence. Susan would report to the county jail in 2 weeks to begin serving her 6-month term, after which she would be released on probation. The restraining order was made permanent, and all other conditions of the plea deal were incorporated into the formal sentencing order. As we left the courthouse that day, I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. It was not perfect justice, perhaps, but it was justice nonetheless. Susan would be held accountable. Emma could begin to truly heal now that the legal process was over, and our community could move forward. The written apology arrived in the mail a week later, along with similar apologies to several other families Susan had harassed. It was formal and somewhat stilted, probably written with heavy input from her attorney, but it acknowledged specific incidents and actions. She apologized for discriminatory behavior, for abuse of her authority, and for creating an atmosphere of fear and intimidation in what should have been a welcoming community. The Willow Creek Estates HOA board issued a formal response accepting the apology while making it clear that Susan was permanently banned from all community facilities and functions. They also announced that they were establishing a community fund to provide resources for any residents who needed counseling or support as a result of Susan's actions during her tenure as president. Life gradually returned to normal, or at least to a new normal. Emma started her junior year of high school with renewed confidence, partly because the story of how she had survived the incident and helped bring someone to justice had made her something of a minor celebrity among her classmates. She even wrote an essay about the experience for her English class that earned her and was selected for inclusion in the school's literary magazine. The neighborhood itself felt different too. People were friendlier, more willing to help each other out, less worried about minor violations and more focused on being good neighbors. The Chens invited us over for dinner, and we discovered that Margaret was an amazing cook. The Williamses organized a neighborhood block party to celebrate the community reforms, and nearly every household participated. The Patel family's daughter became friends with Emma, and they started a small business together doing yard work for elderly neighbors, something that the old HOA board would probably have tried to shut down, but that the new board actively supported. I did occasionally wonder what Susan was thinking during her time in county jail. The woman who had been so obsessed with power and control was now in an environment where she had neither. I hoped, perhaps naively, that the mandatory counseling would help her understand why she had acted the way she had and give her tools to make better choices in the future. Rachel and I had several long conversations about the incident and what it revealed about power, authority, and responsibility. As an FBI agent and a prosecutor, we both held positions of significant authority, and we both had to be constantly aware of the potential for abuse of that power. The difference, we concluded, was accountability. We operated within systems designed to check our power, to hold us responsible for our actions, and to provide recourse for anyone who felt we had overstepped. Susan had operated in an environment with insufficient checks on her authority, and when people tried to challenge her, she had used her position to intimidate and retaliate. 6 months after the sentencing, Susan was released from county jail to begin her probation. We heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had moved to another city, starting over somewhere that she would not be recognized as the woman who had tried to kidnap a teenager and had to be arrested by the FBI. I hoped that wherever she went, she had learned her lesson and would never again put her hands on someone else's child. Emma, now 17, was thriving. The incident, while traumatic, had taught her valuable lessons about standing up for herself, about the difference between legitimate authority and abuse of power, and about the importance of speaking out when something is wrong. She had testified through her written statement and her willingness to participate in the legal process that she would not be silenced or intimidated. The following spring, Willow Creek Estates held its garden tour, the same event that Susan had been so obsessed with the year before. Margaret Chen's garden, full of flowers from Taiwan and carefully cultivated over decades, won the community award. The Patel family's colorful display of traditional Indian plants and flowers earned honorable mention. And our own modest garden, which Rachel and Emma had worked on together throughout the year, was featured in the tour with a small sign noting that it had been designed and maintained by the strong women of the Morrison family. As I stood in our front yard that day, watching neighbors stroll through our garden and admiring the flowers, I reflected on how much had changed in the year since Susan had tried to force Emma into her car. A moment of violence had led to accountability, which had led to reform, which had led to a stronger, more united community. It was not the way any of us would have chosen to learn these lessons, but we had learned them nonetheless. Emma stood next to me, pointing out different plants to a group of neighbors and explaining what each one needed in terms of sun, water, and care. She was poised, confident, and completely at ease. The frightened girl who had been grabbed on the sidewalk had grown into a young woman who knew her own strength and worth. "She is doing really well," Rachel said, stepping up beside me and slipping her hand into mine. "She is," I agreed. "She is stronger than both of us." "She gets that from you," Rachel said with a smile. "No," I said, watching Emma laugh at something one of the neighbors said. "She gets that from herself. We just gave her the space to find it." That evening, after the garden tour ended and the neighbors had all gone home, our family sat together on the back porch. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard, and the air was filled with the scent of flowers and the sound of birds settling in for the night. "Do you ever think about that day?" Emma asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Do you?" "Less than I used to," she said. "At first I thought about it every day, every time I left the house. But now, it is more like a story about something that happened to someone else. I remember it, but it does not have power over me anymore." "That is exactly how it should be," Rachel said. "You took back your power, you did not let what she did define you." "I had help," Emma said, smiling at both of us. "I had you guys and the police and the lawyers, and even the neighbors who came forward to tell their stories. It was not just me against her. It was all of us against the idea that someone can hurt people and get away with it just because they have a little bit of power." I had never been more proud of my daughter than I was in that moment. She had taken a traumatic experience and found meaning in it, found a larger truth about justice and community, and standing up for what was right. The Willow Creek Estates HOA continued to function under its new reformed structure, and life in our neighborhood was peaceful in a way it had not been during Susan's tenure. People felt free to paint their doors, park their cars, and let their children play without fear of arbitrary fines or harassment. The HOA focused on actual community needs like maintaining common areas, organizing social events, and handling legitimate issues like road repairs and drainage problems. I remained with the FBI, continuing to work cases that took me all over the Charlotte metropolitan area and sometimes beyond. But I was more conscious now of coming home on time, of being present for Emma's remaining years before she left for college, of not taking for granted the peaceful sanctuary of our home and neighborhood. Rachel continued her work as a prosecutor, putting away criminals and seeking justice for victims. But she too had gained a new perspective from our experience. She understood more deeply now what it meant to be on the victim's side of the system, to wait anxiously for legal proceedings to move forward, to worry about whether justice would truly be served. It made her a better prosecutor, more empathetic to the victims in her cases while remaining committed to following the law and ensuring fair treatment even for defendants. As for Susan Whitmore, I heard one final update about 2 years after the incident. She had completed her probation successfully, finished her mandatory counseling, and was apparently working as a receptionist in a medical office in Raleigh. She had no position of authority, no power over anyone, and by all accounts was living quietly and staying out of trouble. Her criminal record would follow her for the rest of her life, a permanent reminder of what she had done and the consequences of abusing power. I never spoke to her again, and I hoped never to see her again. But I did occasionally think about her, wondering if she had truly changed or if she simply had learned to hide her controlling tendencies better. I hoped for the former, but suspected the latter. Some people change when confronted with the consequences of their actions. Others simply become more careful about avoiding consequences in the future, but that was not my concern anymore. My concern was my family, my community, and continuing to do my job with integrity and respect for the law. The badge I carried represented authority, yes, but more importantly, it represented responsibility and accountability. I had used that badge to protect my daughter from someone who thought her position gave her similar authority without any of the corresponding responsibility. Emma graduated from high school with honors and was accepted to several excellent universities. She chose to attend the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, close enough to come home on weekends but far enough to have her own independence. She was planning to major in criminal justice with a focus on victim advocacy. Inspired, she said, by her own experience with the legal system and her desire to help others navigate it. On the day we dropped her off at college, I found myself thinking back to that Tuesday afternoon when I had looked out my window and seen Susan Whitmore trying to force Emma into her car. In that moment, time had seemed to stop, and every instinct I had as both a father and a law enforcement officer had kicked into overdrive. I had not known then how everything would turn out, had not known whether the legal system would provide justice or whether Emma would be permanently traumatized. But standing in Emma's dorm room, helping her arrange her belongings while she chatted excitedly with her new roommate about classes and campus activities, I could see that she had not only survived but thrived. The incident was part of her story now, but it was not the whole story. She was so much more than what had happened to her that day. "You okay, Dad?" Emma asked, noticing me standing by the window with a distant expression. "Yeah," I said, smiling at her, "just thinking about how proud I am of you." "You are not going to get all emotional on me, are you?" she teased. "Maybe a little," I admitted. She crossed the room and hugged me tightly. "Thank you for protecting me," she said quietly. "That day and every day since. Always," I promised. "That is what fathers do." As Rachel and I drove home from Chapel Hill that evening, leaving Emma to begin her new adventure, I reflected on the unexpected ways our lives had been changed by that single incident. A moment of violence had tested us, challenged us, and ultimately strengthened us. We had faced an abuse of power and had responded with proper authority, the kind that comes with accountability and oversight and the rule of law. The Willow Creek Estates neighborhood had also been changed, reformed from the ground up after confronting the reality of what unchecked power could become. The new HOA board continued to function well, maintaining property values without harassing residents, enforcing reasonable standards without arbitrary cruelty, and fostering community without creating fear. And Susan Whitmore had been held accountable for her actions, punished appropriately, and given a chance to reform herself. Whether she took that chance or not was ultimately up to her, but at least the opportunity had been provided. The system had worked, not perfectly perhaps, but well enough to achieve justice. As we pulled into our driveway that evening, I saw Margaret Chen working in her garden, and she waved to us with a warm smile. Robert Williams was walking his dog, and he called out a greeting. The Patel family was having a barbecue in their backyard, and the smell of spices and grilled food drifted over the fence. It was a neighborhood that felt like home, safe and welcoming and free from the tyranny that Susan had once imposed. I thought about the badge I carried, the one I had shown Susan that day when I ordered her to take her hands off my daughter. That badge represented authority granted to me by the federal government, but more importantly, it represented a commitment to serve and protect, to uphold the law even when it was difficult, and to be held accountable when I failed to meet those standards. Susan had thought her position as HOA president gave her similar authority, but she had forgotten the part about service and accountability, and that had been her downfall. In the end, the story of what happened that Tuesday afternoon became more than just a story about a confrontation between an FBI agent and an out-of-control HOA president. It became a story about community, about standing up to bullies, about the difference between legitimate authority and abuse of power, and about how ordinary people can come together to create change when they refuse to accept injustice. Emma called that night from her dorm room to tell us she was settling in well and loved her roommate and was excited about her classes. I could hear the joy and confidence in her voice, and I knew that whatever challenges she faced in the future, she would face them with courage and strength. She had learned that lesson the hard way, but she had learned it well. As I hung up the phone and settled in for the evening, I felt a deep sense of peace. Justice had been served. My daughter was safe and thriving. My community was healthy and strong. And the badge I carried still meant what it was supposed to mean: protection for the innocent, accountability for the guilty, and service to those who needed it most. The incident with Susan Whitmore had been frightening and disturbing, but it had also been, in its own way, a reminder of why I had become an FBI agent in the first place. Not for the excitement or the prestige, but for moments like that one, when someone needed protection and I was there to provide it. When someone abused their power and I was there to hold them accountable. When the law needed to be upheld and I was there to uphold it. That was the real meaning of the badge, and that was why, even after 15 years with the Bureau, I still believed in the work I did. Because when it mattered most, when my own daughter's safety was at stake, the badge and everything it represented had been enough to stop a woman who thought she was above the law. And in a society of laws, that was exactly as it should be. The sun set on another quiet evening in Willow Creek Estates, and I knew that Emma was safe at college. Rachel was reading case files in the living room, and our community was at peace. It had taken a crisis to get here, but we had gotten here nonetheless, and that was worth everything we had gone through to achieve it.